So thanks again for listening so intently this morning, and we're back again as a group. We're going to take a look at 3 or 4 cases that really illustrate the INVEST model and how it works. And I want to say that I have changed the names and identifying factors of the people who I'm talking about today, but their stories were a good illustration of some of the techniques that I use in my practice, so I wanted to share them with you. So first we have Linda. Linda is in her 30s. She's very career-driven. In fact, most people would say that her work is her life. She does have a few close friends, and she's very close with her mother and her sister. She lives at home, but travels regularly for work. And she considers herself asexual and aromantic, and she's never met anyone that she's been attracted to. Linda came in for service wanting to understand her new diagnosis of autism. In fact, remember that invalidating comment from the professional? That was Linda. So she said, I had a recent diagnosis of autism and anxiety, and I'm looking to gain a better understanding of what that means to me. Her desired therapy outcomes are to understand her diagnosis and herself better. What are my blind spots? And how do they affect how I live? She wanted to improve various aspects of her life. And if you look, it's almost like she wanted to improve everything. Her work communication, her daily life skills, her relationships, her executive function, basically everything was on the table, which you can imagine can feel a little bit overwhelming as a professional when someone says, help me fix my life. But the good thing is that she was very motivated and driven in counseling to really understand herself. So some of the needs, she would go to work all day. She would work so hard. Her work involved engaging with people on a regular basis, doing a lot of written tasks. But she would come home every single night and cry. And she wouldn't understand why. And she would just repeat over and over. And she would binge eat. She would always buy lots of chocolate, and she would eat chocolate at home at night and binge to cope with her stress. She had no set daily routine except for work, but work hours were irregular. And as I mentioned before, she traveled a lot with work too, so she had to abruptly change her routine on a regular basis. And she had a lot of difficulty settling into sleep at night. With executive functioning, some of the key issues was being able to adjust her routines and adapt to changes as they came at her. She found it very difficult to be able to come up with new solutions and new strategies when new challenges presented themselves. She also found that she was losing things on the regular. And even though, as I mentioned, she was incredibly driven, she was procrastinating when it came to tasks that she didn't like taking notes and written skills. For social communication, one area that she really struggled with was being able to put her thoughts and feelings into words. And she found herself quiet mostly in social situations. If she was with a group, she would largely be silent. And she would enjoy observing others, but she wished that there was a way that she could insert herself and be a part of the conversation. From a sensory point of view, she was highly sensitive to light and sound. And this was difficult with travel and the hustle and bustle of being in airports. And she had difficulty filtering out background noise. So again, when she's going out with groups of people, it's almost like the conversation wasn't happening because she just wasn't able to even hear it beyond the noise around her. She was also hyposensitive to pain and temperature. And what this led to was a lot of injuries because she was not aware that she was hurting herself until it was extreme. So we're talking broken bones and dislocated bones as well. The first thing that we did together was establish daily routines. When I was creating my slides, I realized I really like routines. And I really like recommending routines because they help people. They make people feel calm and they give a sense of predictability in life. So that was the first thing that we focused on. We tried to figure out, okay, well, when you are at home and you're going to work, How many hours of sleep do you need to function properly, to feel like yourself? And so let's say she had to be at work at 9 in the morning. This was pre-COVID. And we'd say, okay, you need 9 hours of sleep. You need to be head to the pillow, eyes closed, asleep at midnight. And then we said, how long does it take you to actually wind down for bed? And she noticed that she's not the kind of person who could just get into bed and fall asleep, because then her mind would whir and think about everything that happened in the day. So we had to build in downtime activities for her so that she could calm her mind and calm her body. Things like stretching before bed or writing out her thoughts and feelings in a journal. And we also set alerts for transitions, because I mentioned to you before, she really struggled to shift and change, but she liked her watch. And so if we said she needed 9 hours of sleep, she had to be in bed by midnight. She had to wind down, let's say at 11 o'clock. So at 10:45, she would set her alert that she needed to get ready to start winding down. She needed these external prompts to remind her of these things, because she didn't have that internal clock. Then we focused on exercise. This is the kind of person who actually really enjoyed exercise, but again, had a really hard time adding exercise into their routine. So the first thing we did, I talked before about this, breaking down activities. So sorry, my words are disappearing. I think it's jet lag. Let's think of all the activities you enjoy doing that involve movement. And we listed them all out. Yoga, walking, running, heavy lifting of weights. And we have that up as a visual so that anytime she feels like she wants to do her exercise, it's not sitting there for a half an hour thinking, what am I going to do today? It's right there waiting for her with her options. We talked about what are the best times of day to work out. For her, best time of day was at the end of the workday, so that she can sort of get rid of some of that energy that she was carrying from work and release it. And how are we going to make this happen? These are strategies I do in my own life. So you take out your workout clothes the night before. You pick out everything you need, your sports bra, your leggings, your running shoes, your everything, and you put it out, and you plan your route in advance, so you know exactly what you're doing. So the next day, all you have to do is show up, and it's all ready for you. And this really helped her with her transitions in getting into an exercise routine. For tedious tasks, what we did, again, is we primed her the night before to be ready the next day. So basic stuff, right? To-do list. What do you need to do tomorrow that you don't want to do? Okay? Put that down on your list. Try to estimate how long is it going to take you to do each task, and break those tasks down. So if there's multiple steps involved, don't just say, I don't know, go grocery shopping. Like, break it down into all the steps involved with groceries. Figure out what you're going to buy, go to the store, get the groceries, come back, etc. So you can also get a sense of achievement and accomplishment that you can check off the things on your list. And we also, when we wanted to create more of a tight routine for her, we broke her day down hour by hour, each task that she wanted to complete per hour. I'm going to just pause for a sec. As I mentioned before, Linda really struggled to understand what she was feeling and why. She would come home every day crying, not knowing why. So the first thing we did in this area was to build her awareness about feelings and emotions and where they come from. So we wanted her to tune into her thoughts. What was she noticing about what she was thinking at the end of the day? Were there thoughts that were coming up? What about throughout the day? Were there any thoughts that kind of stood out as something that was negative or defeatist or difficult? What body sensations was she having? And we would do a head-to-toe scan. We would actually go and say, okay, what about in your head? Do you feel anything there? No? Okay, let's move down, let's move down. Because it wasn't enough just to say, what are you feeling in your body? We actually needed to break it down and have her attention focused in each different area. And also to witness her actions. So she started to see some patterns that I'll talk about in a minute. I wanted her to ask on the regular, how am I feeling? So she started actually setting alerts on her phone that said, how am I feeling? Question mark, just so she could become used to checking in with herself about this. And then the hard part, why am I feeling this way? So what has happened today? What happened yesterday? What is this reminding me of that is causing me to feel this way? And we realized that for her, it could take a few days to come up with answers. She really it took her a long time to process her emotions and to recognize what was happening. But we decided that it was really, really, really important to be patient with herself about this and give herself the time she needed to understand what she was feeling and why. Because then emotions aren't a puzzle anymore. They're not confusing. They're something that are understandable and knowable. This is a visual that I created years ago, and I kind of adapt every once in a while when a new emotion comes up. And it's called Identifying Feelings. And across the top, we have some of the key emotional categories: happy, sad, angry, confused, afraid, etc. And then we have different levels of intensity from low, medium to high. And sometimes presenting this list alone is an intervention in and of itself. I think I told this story actually at ACT years ago, but it was quite significant to witness. One of my clients loved animals, and she was really just very passionate about animal rights. And when she was driving in on the 401, which is our nightmare highway to get into our city, she was stuck behind a truck that was full of pigs that were going to slaughter. And it was so distressing for her to be behind this truck, and they couldn't get out of it. They were stuck in that lane. And when she arrived in my office, she was shaking, and she could hardly speak, and she was so overwhelmed. And I just handed her this sheet of paper, and I said, "What are you feeling?" And I gave her a pen, and she was able to circle different emotions that she was feeling, and immediately you just saw the distress calm down. Because there's the initial distress, which might be, sadness or anxiety, but then there's the secondary distress, which is confusion and overwhelm, because they don't know what they're feeling. And not knowing what you're feeling is very distressing. So this really helps give language to emotions. And for those of you who know Brené Brown, she's a social worker. She's done an amazing TED Talk. She's an educator about emotions. She actually said that the average individual only knows 3 emotion words. And that the only way to have an emotional experience is if you have the language to think about it and talk about it. So if we can build emotional vocabulary for ourselves as clinicians, but also for our students and for our clients, then we can get more in touch with what we're feeling. So for her, what we realized is crying wasn't sadness. So it's not always like a direct correlation. Oh, if you're crying, you must be sad. She was actually overwhelmed. She spent every single day of her life feeling overwhelmed and only could let some of that out when she was in the privacy of her own home or in her own room. And she realized something about herself, and this is something in counseling that I really try to get to, is what is the underlying belief that is driving this behavior? So this woman, as I mentioned, she was at the top of her career. And I say top, if I told you what she did, you would be unbelievably impressed, and I will not. But she was, and it was something she had wanted to do from a very, very, very young age. So she should have been happy, right? But what pushed her so hard, it was the belief that if she didn't achieve, that she would be found out, that people would know that she's different, and that she would be less than. And so she always had to push herself as hard as she could and prove herself so that no one would find out that there's something wrong with her or that she's defective. So coming to that realization was very, very important for her. And trying to accept who she is and even where that came from, where that belief came from, was very important. And knowing her autism diagnosis helped to explain some of this. I mentioned that she was having some issues at work. Her manager was a micromanager, constantly hovering over her, asking questions. And the reason why this was so distressing for her is she was worried that her manager was going to notice that she's not good enough. And her manager was going to take away her job, and therefore everything would fall apart in her life and everyone would know that she's a failure. So it wasn't just that the manager was a difficult person to work with, it was how threatening it was to her sense of identity. And we realized that the eating was a self-soothing behavior. She told me that when she was a kid, she would go to school and she wouldn't eat in the morning before school because she felt sick. And she wouldn't eat during the day because it was too stimulating in the cafeteria. It was too loud and too many smells. So she wouldn't eat from the morning she woke up until she got home, and then she would binge. And she would binge and binge and binge until that feeling stopped. And that was that feeling of being overwhelmed. Another pause. This is a website, thinktoperform.com. I like it. It's very easy to use. It's highly visual. It gives definitions. And for those people who are familiar with ACT, not this kind of ACT, but acceptance and commitment therapy, one of the core principles is that people should be living in line with their values. And this is something that is very important for autistic people because they've often been taught to not listen to themselves and to just do what other people want of them. And values exercises, so you go to the website and it starts with like 55 values. And then you have to keep choosing your preferred values, and you pare it down and you pare it down until you get to 3 to 5 values. And they say that these are the core values or beliefs that you should use to guide your decision making. And this is really helpful for autistic people because, as I mentioned before, indecision can be a real factor. It can be really hard to make decisions. So if you have a framework, okay, is this consistent with my values? Does this allow me to feel competent? Can I be here and be independent? If these are what Linda's core values were, is this meaningful work to me? And if we're saying no, then we might need to reevaluate some of the decisions that are being made. So I do try to do values exercises with my clients as it's relevant. And again, it's giving language to experiences, giving them something to think about, something to talk about, a common vernacular that they can use when they're looking for jobs in workplace settings, and even in finding friendships. So we've done some educating for her to really tune into who she is. And now we're strengthening. So she's identifying her emotions. As I mentioned, she's setting alerts throughout her day and checking in to see how she's feeling. We're also coming up with coping thoughts because when she started to tune into her thoughts, she noticed that a lot of her thoughts are highly negative, and she has a lot of negative self-talk. I can't do this is too hard for me, this is terrible. And she was always fighting against that. So we came up with coping thoughts to counterbalance those as something that she could use to think about, even proactively. We started to notice that when she was having her meltdowns, they weren't as intense. There was one foot in and one foot out. So there was a part of her that was actually witnessing the meltdown and watching her have a meltdown. And that part was able to learn more about the meltdown and about what she needed in that experience. And we also came to understand that she was avoiding a lot of things in her life, a lot of difficult conversations with family. She was avoiding moving out and being on her own and the fear of that. She was avoiding making decisions about her work. Because as I said, she was at the top, and yet she was so terribly miserable to the point of being suicidal. We came up with a list of stress management techniques that really made a difference for her. She found meditation helpful. She used the Muse headband. I've used this myself, and it was the only thing that's helped me get into a meditation practice. It's a biofeedback, so when you wear it, It tells you what's happening with your brain activity, and it tells you when your brain activity is slowing and when it's increasing. And it's a very helpful tool to teach you how to meditate. She loved running, and it was a really good way for her to clear her head. Lifting weights gave her deep pressure in her system to calm it down. She started scheduling in alone time, because before she'd go to work all day, then her friends would invite her out at night, then she'd be home with her family. And there was no time when she was just literally by herself. So some of the exercise helped with that. We said you can have treats. All of us need treats, food treats. They make us feel good, make us feel comfortable. But let's just start with keeping small amounts of them in the house, instead of going out and buying bulk bags of chocolate from warehouses and bringing them home. This one was super cool. She came up with this on her own. She collected positive cards and mementos that she had gotten over the years in her career, things that people had written to her, and she would read them anytime she was feeling down or felt like she wasn't making an impact. And I think this is such a beautiful idea. She found adult coloring calming. And one thing was she would often wake up in the morning and feel like crap and not want to push herself throughout the day. So she was a real visual person, so she put pictures of mountains and ocean and things that would really make her feel inspired to help her get through that shower so she could get out the door and get along the day. And these are just ones that worked for her. I think they work for lots of people too. It's important to find your own toolbox, your own techniques that work for you. And to make it visual too, with having a list of them, because it's very easy to forget the things that make us feel good, which I know sounds really silly, but life is busy and these things happen. So make a list so you can remember. We talked about socializing. So what's the best arrangement for socializing with friends? It's not in a bar with a large group of people. It's actually one-on-one. But she was afraid of being one-on-one with friends because then all the attention would be on her and she'd have to carry the conversation. So we really worked on what are some things you can talk about with friends, what are some questions that you can ask friends, what are some activities you can do together to take the focus off of just the conversation. We practiced some of this together. Like I said, she was really motivated. She really wanted to make changes in her life. And I referred to our autism women and non-binary group, Good Company, and she really liked meeting other people who had similar experiences. From a sensory processing point of view, she didn't even think this would be a possibility, but we just said, if you're overwhelmed or if it's too loud, just leave, just go. No one is telling you have to stay. If something doesn't feel good, get out. And she learned that that was something she could give herself permission to do. And where she couldn't, she wore her headphones. With work, one thing that she learned was that her boss's micromanagement style had nothing to do with her. That was just the way her boss was. She was an anxious person, and that was how she coped with her anxiety. So that really helped my client get a little bit of distance and understanding that the way that her boss is treating her wasn't about her. It didn't make it a lot easier because it was still affecting her. But what we did do is we created proactive communication. So previously the boss would hound her to get updates on things that were happening. So instead, she started sending updates to the boss about what was happening. So she was controlling the communication. And that really helped their relationship. And it actually helped the manager feel more confident. And she definitely started to back off. Because what would happen before is the boss would ask her a question, and because the client needs time to process, she couldn't answer. And she would just freeze. And then she felt like an idiot, because what kind of person can answer a basic question from their boss? And she didn't disclose her autism at that point, so there was no explanation for her behavior other than she just didn't have the answer. So it's very helpful to be proactive. We also created, for the tedious tasks, we created templates and shortcuts. So instead of her having to start from scratch every time she needed to take her notes, we created a notepad that had different headings that she could just put the information in so she didn't have to start over each time. So on a good sleep schedule with scheduled eating, so she wasn't binging, she was actually eating at specific times throughout the day, so she wasn't super hungry. I taught her to tune into her energy and figure out what activities bring energy and what activities take energy away. She added that downtime we talked about. She scheduled her transitions in. We saw a huge reduction in her meltdowns and a huge improvement in her happiness. She started asking herself, am I doing what I want to be doing or what others want me to do? And remarkably, after working up towards this job throughout her career, she left her job. She just decided that it was not the right fit for her. She could not work with this individual anymore, and she took the risk to leave. And it was a good decision. She went back to school, she got a different set of skills, and she started working in that direction. She's living a life that is in line with her values, with meaningful work and being independent. And she started accepting help from friends and family. She started to tell them a little bit more about what was going on. And instead of her being the helper all the time, they were helping her. She also found a partner, and she fell in love. And I know that it seems weird that a lot of my stories end with, and then they fell in love. But I think what it's saying is that when you love yourself and you know yourself, then you can be open to bringing in other people in your life who are healthy and happy. And she became very intentional and reflective in how she lived her life. So just grab a drink. Case number 2 is Stacey. Stacey's 13. And she was recently diagnosed with autism. And when she was told that she was autistic, she said, absolutely not. That is not the case. I'm not accepting that diagnosis. So this was a really interesting one because I could never, ever say that I knew she was autistic when we were working together. The reason for the referral was twofold. The parents wanted support with behavior in the home, and the teen wanted help with building friendships. So even though she didn't like the label, she was still open to help, which was really great to see. So the parents wanted to get on the same page with expectations. The siblings, there was constant negativity between them and lots of put-downs. And they said at the dining room table, she eats like an animal, quote unquote. Those are her words. And that was important to them. They didn't want her to behave that way. So the first thing we did was find common ground between mom and dad, because dad didn't really care that she ate like an animal. It really wasn't important to him. As long as we're having family dinners and everybody is talking, then that is the priority. But for the mom, this was really, really important. So we said, if you're going to implement rules, it can't just be for the daughter. It has to be for everybody at the table. So there were 3 kids, like 10, 11, 13-ish. And so any rules that were implemented were across the board. So it's, we eat with our cutlery, we ask to pass the food. And I know that these are trivial things for some people, but for this mother, it was really important. Perhaps it was a reflection of her as a parent, and she didn't like that, she made her feel uncomfortable, or maybe she was worried about her daughter being in social settings in the future and being seen as if she can't, be a civilized individual. But these were their priorities. We talked about giving feedback. If you're going to tell her that she did a good job, tell her by text, because she doesn't want the attention on her in front of her brothers. That's embarrassing. So they started text messaging her at the end of meals to say, you did a great job with asking with the food, and please next time, whatever it was. They gave her the positive feedback through text. She said it made it more enjoyable for everyone. And in terms of their relationship, she also fed her some scripts that she could say to her brothers to strengthen those relationships a little bit, because she was so negative with them and always judging them. So she said, here are some things you could say to your brothers if you want to be a little bit closer, because this is important to me. Some kids, they don't have a motivation to change, but they do want to change for their parents. Not all kids, don't get me wrong. I understand that is not a motivating factor for all. But for some, they really care about your well-being as a parent. And so they will do things if it'll make you feel better. You just have to decide what you want to choose. Again, this parent, it had to do with table manners. I might choose something like a little bit more important, but that was what was important for her. I also told them that she needs downtime, This girl was involved in every activity outside of school, debating and soccer, and she just was never just a kid, just relaxing. We actually saw immediate improvement in the dinner time behavior, which then we saw an immediate reduction in mom's anxiety and reactions, right? So this was a really nice thing that was happening, even if it was just about passing food and asking nicely. The whole climate, the whole environment within the house was getting calmer. Also, they started doing rose and thorn. I do this with my kids too. Doesn't work for everyone again, but some people really like it. So you sit around the table and you say, what was a rose for today? So that's something good that happened. And what was a thorn for today? Something bad that happened. And then there's also one called bud, where you could talk about what's like an opportunity for growth. So having structured discussion at the table can really help people share, because otherwise it could just be a really quiet meal with lots of sounds of banging forks and gnashing away at food. And the parents started to feel more effective and hopeful. They felt like, okay, if we have a clear strategy and we're both on the same page, we can actually make changes in our family. So again, we're starting to see some confidence, and they're feeling like they can take on maybe some more serious challenges. We created bonding moments too, so it wasn't just about the interactions were about giving and receiving feedback or instruction, but how are some ways that you can get closer to your kids? And they found things that they both liked. The mom and the daughter both liked to bake, so they would create like baking time together. And the dad and the daughter both liked basketball, so they would play basketball together. And sometimes they would include the sons in it as well. But having that one-on-one quality time with each parent was really important for their daughter at this important stage in her life, because she didn't have a lot of friends when we first met. And so the parents were really her source of social support and interaction. So Stacey said, I want to become closer with one or two friends. And a little history about Stacey. This is going to sound really familiar probably to many of you. Stacey first picked the popular girls to be friends with because she thought they were cool. And the popular girls didn't feel the same way about her. But she didn't understand or notice that at first. And so they would try to ditch her and leave her. And it wasn't until they were overtly mean and nasty did she start to realize, okay, these people are not my friends. And she started having lunch in the bathroom, which is not a nice place to eat. So she became more open to making other connections. Stacey and I used a visual board. This is recreated, but at first we just drew a stick figure, and we said, okay, this is you. Where are some opportunities where you interact with peers, where you can meet people? And she went to overnight camp, school, and soccer. And so we said, okay, in each of those settings, who are some of the kids that you can picture yourself being friends with, or that you're already friends with a little bit, but could get a closer friendship? And she was really good. She was able to list lots of names, lots of people. She said, camp, there's a few kids. School, there's lots of kids I could get to know, the nice kids, the geeky kids. Like, she didn't want to, but she knew that they were there. And she said, not soccer. There's no chance to talk at soccer. And I'm really competitive at soccer, so no one wants to be my friend, which was true. So we said, well, what do you like about these people? Because I wanted to make sure that she was choosing people that were actually sort of safe choices or good choices. So she said, there's something about their energy I'm drawn to them. They're easy to talk to, and they're hardworking. No surprise, Stacey was a A++ student. She was very hardworking. She really valued academics, and she wanted to be friends with other kids who did the same. So we said, what are some things you can talk about with each of these groups? And look again how we're taking something that is highly complex, but that some people just do naturally, and we're breaking it down into their component parts. So what are some topics that you could talk about? Oh, well, I could talk about camp with my camp friends and my counselors, and we could talk about the activities and our favorite activities. Everybody likes working out. I can ask them how school's going, because we all go to different schools. And some of them really like plays, so we could talk about plays. We did the same thing with her school friends. Okay, great. Let's list those topics. And what are some things you can do with your friends? So this is a group of girls that really like to exercise. She said, I could go to the gym with them. I could go to the gym after school with some of my friends from school. We can go to Starbucks together. We could go to the mall. We could see a movie. And what are some of the barriers, things that are getting in the way for you to be able to do this? She says, well, I don't always know what to say to my friends, and I don't know when it's my turn, and I have a really hard time starting conversations. You guys have this, so you can take a look at some of these reasons, but what we did is we started to build on her social skills. All the things that she said were barriers, we started to work on. The first one was just how to get someone's attention, how to say their name, how to actually put your phone down so you're not looking at the phone but looking at the other person. We used scripts of things that she could say, and these are derived from her and I together, things that she thought her friends might be interested in, and we practiced them together. I showed her the friendship pyramid, which looks at how a friend, there's acquaintances and level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 friends, so she could understand the progression of friendship, that it wasn't just you meet someone and then you become close. We talked about being in the moment. Most of the time when she was talking to her friends, she was thinking about all the schoolwork she had to do because she wanted to be the best in the class. So we had to get her back and grounded and focused on the conversations. She ended up thriving socially. She really did. She took all the strategies that we came up with and became much better at judging character. She became friends with the nice kids, and the nice kids welcomed her, which was really, really nice. She built close friendships and even had sleepover parties. And she even had her first boyfriend. Again, I hate to say all the romance stuff, but it's this evolution of sort of understanding yourself and then connecting with others. And she ended up doing really well. Okay, our third person is Laura. Laura's 19. She's just starting university. She has a host of labels and diagnoses that come with her. ASD, MDD, which is major depressive disorder, OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, and panic disorder. So she's coming with these labels, and it's like she carries them with her. She was, again, the kind of student who wanted to be perfect, but had a lot of procrastination and ended up having panic attacks right before anything was due. She also recently came out as gay to her family, and she was holding in a part-time job. This is the resilience that I'm speaking about. This is a person who was having panic attacks, who was struggling, who was in university, and she is doing incredible at her part-time job. It was completely compartmentalized, where she just did really well in that setting. It was a very good environment for her. She told me when we started, therapy has hurt me, not helped me. So, already I'm thinking, okay, I have to sell her, I have to build her trust. The first thing we did was focus on her safety. She was highly suicidal. We talked about a safety plan for when she had suicidal thoughts. She ended up going to the hospital a number of times with suicidal attempts. She was hitting and biting herself during self-harm, so we were trying to come up with alternatives to help her keep herself safe during those moments, and we decided to put school on hold. So this is an example where you know the source of stress, and for her it was school on top of everything else. What can you put aside for now? And school is a really good one to put on hold because you can always go back. So that's what she did. There were some issues within the family. Dad was kind of like all the way over here. He did not accept her sexual orientation, her coming out. He was very upset with this information. And then we have Laura and Mom were completely enmeshed and codependent on one another. Mom was doing all of her advocating for her, and Laura hadn't really ever been able to just sort of do that on her own. Home was very chaotic. They lived in basically a hoarder situation. There was stuff everywhere. And for Laura, she really likes calm visual environments. It's very important to her. But her house was just a huge mess. And there was a lot of invalidation from family, extended family, about both her autistic diagnosis and her sexuality. So, you're not autistic, and that's not true, and you're just sensitive. Okay, this is a lot of information, so I'm not going to be able to go into it in detail, but this is one of the ways that you can teach someone to become more aware of their emotional experiences. And this is based on a children's tool called the Incredible 5-Point Scale. It looks really different for kids. For adults, what you want to do is get them to think about what are the triggers that lead to the emotion? What are the thoughts that take place at each level? What do I feel in my body? What do I look like? What would others notice at this stage? And what are some things I can do to help myself? Or what can others do to help me? And the reason why this is so important is we were talking before about alexithymia and interoception. So if you're not picking up on the cues that you're upset, and you're not picking up on the physical cues that you're distressed, you're often not aware that you're upset until you're at a 4 out of 5, where you're already overwhelmed, where you're sort of past the point of coping. So what we have done here is to get her to start noticing what it's like when those early signs of anxiety are showing up, and what are the things that cause it. There are different tools you can use to measure depression, anxiety, and stress. There's the DAS-21 that I use sometimes with clients, but sometimes, as I said before, using a more individualized approach is best. So for Laura, how did she know that she was feeling good? She washed her face in the morning. That was a big indicator. If she didn't wash her face, she knew she was having a bad day. Her room was tidy. If she had the strength and the time to tidy up her room, she knew that everything would be okay. She was eating healthy, and she said, I want to speak to others when I'm feeling good. And when I don't feel good, I don't want to talk to anybody. We started to build good habits together. This is around sleep, as we talked about, and exercise. But exercise was really hard for her because she had significant pain. She had endometriosis to the point that she would go to the hospital for the amount of pain that she was in before she could advocate to get in for surgery. She developed pain in her joints and had to start using a cane at the age of 19 to support her for walking around. She had fibromyalgia, and she had a huge lack of faith in the medical system because no one believed her of what she was going through. Again, putting language into experiences. This was a tool that I think one of my clients shared with me, actually, and it's a way of having a common language to talk about pain. So you can say, like, what number are you at? Just like the 5-point scale here, where a family member can say, what number are you at? And she can say, I'm at a 3. And that's his common language. It's a shortcut. So with pain, it could be the same thing. The person's at a 7. So the pain completely dominates senses. It's causing you to think unclearly about half the time. At this point, you're effectively disabled and frequently cannot live alone. This is comparable to an average migraine headache. So putting language into pain experiences gave her the opportunity to communicate more effectively with family, but also with her care team, like her medical providers, and with her teachers, because at this point she had gone back to school, but she couldn't submit assignments sometimes because she literally could not get out of bed. So how did she learn to thrive? She went back to school on a reduced course load. Full university course loads are too much for autistic students, for the most part. I know you can't make general statements, but I would say if you can do a reduced course load, please do. Take a little bit longer to finish, and you'll finish with your mental health more intact. We came up with high, medium, and low pain activities, again, making a visual, making a chart. So what are some things she can do when her pain is low? Oh, she can go out with friends. She can go for a walk. What about when her pain is high? She can watch a YouTube video. And it was really important for her because when she had high pain for a long time, when her pain started to wane a little bit and lifted, she forgot what life was like at that state. And having those activities listed were very helpful. She got a therapy dog, and this was really important because after all of her pain experiences and leaving university, the idea of reintegrating into life was very, very scary, and her anxiety was quite high. So the dog allowed her to get back into school and get back into life. And she actually ended up turning the dog into a pet after a few years, but it was that real bridge that the dog allowed her to be out in the world again. She learned to set boundaries with her family, the people who were speaking ill of her, about her different identity categories. She protected herself from that and came up with other conversation topics. We talked about advocating for her medical needs and some of the ways that she can ask for the things that she needs. She learned some life skills, which was very important because I mentioned before the relationships within the family were so intertwined that she didn't know how to do anything for herself. So she set some goals to learn how to cook and bake and bathe herself. Of course she knows how to bathe, but to do it on a regular routine, how to budget, and how to do her own laundry. And they carved out space in the house just for her away from the mess, and they realized that that was important. And again, she ended up meeting a partner. It was a really healthy relationship and someone who understood her autism and understood her pain, and she was able to be very open and vulnerable with them. So those are the 3 cases. We have 10 minutes left, is that right, Deborah?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so what I could do is just quickly go through one. It's not in your notes, but I want to just tell you I'm doing something called SSTs, single session therapy appointments. So they're 90-minute appointments, 80 minutes in person or virtual with the individual, and 10 minutes for notes and resources. And this is for very specific, focused areas that people are seeking help with. So this is an example of one. A client was 54. She started to think that she might be on the spectrum, and she came to that realization thinking her partner of many years was autistic. And she started to do research. And if you've met an autistic woman, you know they like to research. And they probably know more about autism than a lot of the professionals themselves. She also had what I was talking about before with relational trauma. She was with a man for 10 years, and he suddenly broke up with her and cut off all ties with her, and she didn't know why. And it was very, very traumatic for her. So her strengths, she's very self-aware. She was trying to process her emotions through writing, so she would try to write every day, and she would seek support. But she recognized that instead of expressing sadness, she was using anger to process her emotions. She was just angry at everyone in her life and angry at herself. She acknowledged that she experienced a significant loss in the year, and there was some grief around that. She was having issues with communication with her colleagues, and she was starting to shut down when she really wanted to get activated instead and do things to take care of herself. So this is, we can only do so much in 80 minutes, but it's a really nice way to talk about an issue. Sometimes it's a good way to actually set therapy goals if you want to do ongoing therapy, but just to help organize and prioritize those issues. So for her, we thought it'd be helpful for her to understand attachment styles, to understand her boyfriend's change in behavior. So she had a framework to understand, why people move towards intimacy and why people move away. And we talked about building a routine to get back into a schedule, because ever since the breakup, she was just basically, half asleep, half awake, living in her bed, not doing any of the things that she knew she needed to do for herself to feel good. But we also talked about being kind and being patient to herself if she veered off course. So if she wasn't following her new routine, that's okay. It's hard to establish new routines, and it's especially hard when you're grieving a relationship and when you're confused and overwhelmed about what took place. We suggested that she attend our Good Company group, which is our women's group and our non-binary group, to meet other autistic women. Because even though she wasn't officially diagnosed, certainly it sounded like she was autistic and she could benefit from meeting others. And we talked about booking a follow-up session to explore her autistic identity further. So we shared some readings on attachment, which aren't listed here, We gave her the link to the Good Company group and that neuroclastic article. So remember the columns that I showed you before about the neurodiversity profile? This is actually from an article from Neuroclastic, and this is the link here. It's called It's a Spectrum, Doesn't Mean What You Think. And you can read a little bit more about the profile of autism and how it takes away the idea of high-functioning autism and low-functioning autism, looking more at support needs, and also about, this is also in the other presentation as well, so you don't have to necessarily copy it down. But how each person presents differently on each sort of different category of autism. So those are some presentations that demonstrate INVEST and the use of INVEST in my practice. As I said, it's been such an honor to have the opportunity to support women through their growth and through their stages and watch them learn more about themselves and be a part of that process. And I realize that when I'm with them, I get to see that relaxed side of them that not everybody gets to see. And I get to see those strengths and talents. So I always try to encourage that so that they can develop those strengths and talents and be present like that in the world so they can have a situation where they can thrive. So that's it for me. Please think about your questions. Think about what you learned today, what was meaningful for you, anything that you want to take away as a professional, maybe as an autistic person on the spectrum, or as a loved one, of how you might want to do things differently within your own life. And I really look forward to hearing your questions tomorrow. So thank you very much.